Chapter 1. The Last Supper at Montrose Hall. Absolutely not, Felix, said Lady Cecilia Montrose, lifting her chin with that imperial stillness that made her famous and feared. The matter is settled. Felix Montrose, arms crossed and jaw clenched, stood just left of the fireplace. His face flushed from either wine or rage, perhaps both. "You've no right to cut me out," he said through gritted teeth. "Father would never have allowed. Your father," she cut in crisply, "is not here, and I do have the right. The estate is mine, and it shall pass to whom I see fit." At the long dining table, Clara Hensley kept her eyes fixed on her plate, delicately turning her fork over a bit of lamb she hadn't touched. The tension had risen since the brandy was served, and though no one had spoken it aloud, everyone at Montrose Hall knew what Lady Cecilia meant. The whispers had started days ago about a cousin, a boy, someone from the Talbot line. Felix turned to her now, voice rising. "So you're choosing him over your own family?" Lady Cecilia merely sipped her wine. "You are not my son, Felix. Let us not pretend otherwise." Then she added, her eyes narrowing, "And one's legacy should not be wasted on foolishness and cards." Felix's hand twitched by his side. Poirot, seated beside Reverend Blakely at the far end, watched him closely. He had only arrived in the area a fortnight before, taking a brief respite from London cases, but had found himself invited through a vague acquaintance with Dr. Pennington. He had not intended to engage in any mystery. That, he thought now, was foolish optimism. Dr. Pennington cleared his throat, attempting to deflect. "Lady Cecilia, perhaps this is not the setting for such announcements." "Nonsense," she replied, patting her lips with her napkin. "It is precisely the right moment. I intend to formalize the changes in the morning. Mer Talbot will be named sole heir." A silence fell, thick and uncomfortable. Poirot noted the flicker in Clara's expression, something between guilt and panic. Reverend Blakely bowed his head slightly, muttering, "Let God's will be done," though his fingers tightened around the base of his glass. "Have you met this Talbot fellow?" Felix asked, bitterly. "He's a stranger." "He is blood," said Cecilia sharply. "And that, dear boy, is more than you are." Felix rose abruptly, his chair screeching across the floor. "You'll regret this," he said, not shouted, not whispered, just spoken low and dangerous. Poirot's mustache twitched slightly. Without a word, Felix left the room, heavy footfalls echoing up the hall. Clara flinched when the door slammed. Lady Cecilia stood, her voice now cool as frost. "Thank you, all for indulging a tiresome old woman." She turned to Poirot and gave him a tight smile. "Monsieur Poirot, I do hope Yorkshire hasn't bored you yet." "Not in the least, madam," he replied softly, "though I must say, this dinner-it was enlightening." As the party dispersed, Poirot lingered briefly. He watched as Lady Cecilia took a thin bracelet from her wrist, a lovely sapphire piece, and ran her fingers over it thoughtfully. Her lips moved, a whisper to herself. Then, with a sigh, she turned and left the room. Later that evening, the halls of Montrose Hall were still. Clara Hensley stood outside the study, her nightgown tucked under a heavy shawl. Her hand hovered over the doorknob, uncertain. From within, she heard nothing. No movement, no voice. She had come to speak again with Lady Cecilia one last time. But the door was locked. Clara hesitated, then withdrew silently, the green silk scarf about her neck fluttering slightly as she moved down the corridor dot in the east wing. Poirot sipped his tisane and gazed out the window toward the far study window, where the faintest candlelight flickered behind thick curtains. The house was a fortress of secrets. He had seen enough of such places to know. And something, tonight, he thought, had changed irreversibly. The next morning, the household was in disarray. Lady Cecilia Montrose was found dead in her study chair by the housemaid at 7 o'clock. Her body slumped, head tilted slightly, eyes open but dull. The study door had been locked from the inside. The first to arrive after the scream was Inspector Arlo Brent, already at the Hall to collect a report from the gardener about local thefts. A fortunate coincidence. He called it heart failure, he said confidently, examining the body with gloved hands. Nothing more. Poor lady. Likely the stress. These things happen in women of her age. Poirot said nothing at first. He simply observed. The scene was strangely serene. Lady Cecilia's tea tray remained untouched, still warm, oddly. Her desk was perfectly ordered. But what caught Poirot's eye most was the sapphire bracelet. It lay broken beside her. Its clasp, twisted unnaturally. Several of the gemstones had scattered across the rug. One was missing entirely. She must have clutched at it when it happened, Brent mused, rising. Muscle spasms, perhaps. The heart goes. The body jerks. Natural as anything. Perhaps. Poirot said mildly, and yet, may I ask, Inspector, does it not strike you as odd that the cup of tea is untouched? Brent scoffed. Maybe. She was reaching for it and never got there. Perhaps. Poirot leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing on the bracelet. And this the breaking of something so dear, so personal it is quite symbolic. Nest's pause. Brent gave him a wary look. Now listen, Poirot. I know you've got a reputation, but this isn't one of your London dramas. There's no foul play here. Not a mark on her. Poirot smiled politely. But, of course, you are quite right. He stepped aside as Brent signaled for the body to be moved. Clara stood just beyond the doorway, white as a sheet, her eyes locked on the broken bracelet. Poirot approached her gently. Mademoiselle, he said softly, this bracelet Lady Cecilia wore it often, none every day, Clara replied, her voice barely above a whisper. It was her husband's gift. She only ever took it off. To sleep. Poirot nodded slowly. Then it was not merely ornament. It meant something to her. Clara hesitated, then added, she was wearing it last night after dinner. I saw it. It wasn't broken then. Poirot turned back toward the study, his eyes glinting. Indeed? Yes, she whispered. I think it broke when she died. Poirot gave a slow, thoughtful nod. Perhaps it did, mademoiselle, or perhaps it broke after. He said no more, but in his mind the puzzle had already begun to form. And somewhere, in that broken bracelet, lay the first fracture of a perfect plan. Chapter 2. Midnight and the bracelet shatters. I don't understand, Clara whispered, her hand trembling, as she lifted a broken sapphire from the rug. Why would she? It was her favorite piece. Poirot watched her silently. The others had been ushered from the room by Inspector Brent, who was now issuing brisk instructions to constables and frowning over forms. Yet Poirot remained where he stood, gazing at the fragments of the once delicate bracelet. Something about the way it had broken neatly, almost deliberately, troubled him. "You are certain, mademoiselle," he said gently, "that it was intact last night?" Clara nodded. "Yes, I helped her with her shawl. She touched the bracelet as she always did. She wore it like a talisman. And this morning," Poirot murmured, "we find it shattered." Fascinating. He crouched, examining the stones. One was missing, perhaps, he added softly. Not everything is as natural as our good inspector believes. A constable stepped into the room. "Sir," he addressed Brent. "The study door was locked from the inside. We had to break it to get in." "Which proves the obvious," Brent replied, waving a dismissive hand. "She died alone. The stress of the will business too much for her heart." Poirot turned to him. "Forgive me, Inspector, but a locked door does not always mean what it seems." Brent scowled. "It's a tragic death, Poirot, not a conjuring trick." Poirot gave his signature half-smile. "All death, monsieur, is tragic, but some are more calculated." Brent glanced at him. "You're suggesting murder?" "I suggest nothing yet," Poirot replied, "only that the scene bears examination. For instance, this teacup." He gestured to the tray beside the desk. The cup sat upright, filled, untouched. The lady did not drink, and yet she prepared the tea, or someone did. "Could have been from earlier," Brent muttered. "Then it would be cold," Poirot replied mildly. He touched the side of the porcelain. "It is warm still." Brent blinked. "Perhaps the maid brought it in." Poirot arched an eyebrow. "Let us ask her." The maid, a red-faced girl named Elsie, was summoned. She wrung her hands and spoke in a hurried voice. "No, sir, I didn't bring no tea this morning. Last time I saw Lady Cecilia was last night, just after 10. She sent me off, said she'd be locking the study and not to be disturbed." "You're certain?" Poirot asked. "She was quite firm about it. Locked the door behind me." "I didn't. Bring no tray." Brent waved her off, now visibly irritated. "You'll have us suspecting ghosts." "Poirot, she locks herself in. No one enters, no one leaves, and she dies. Simple." "Ah, but simplicity can be deceptive," Poirot said, plucking a sapphire shard delicately from the floor. "And as you yourself said, Inspector, the door was locked. Yet the tea is warm. The bracelet is broken. There is no spilt liquid, no overturned chair, no struggle." Brent folded his arms. "Which proves my point, or someone else's design," Poirot murmured, almost to himself. By mid-morning, the household had grown heavy with silence. Felix reappeared around noon, his appearance rumpled, eyes bloodshot. He entered the drawing-room with an air of disdain, offering condolences with clenched teeth. Poirot approached him quietly. "Monsieur Montrose," he began. You were not seen this morning until some time after the discovery. You were not in your room. I believe. Felix glared. I went out for a walk. In the pouring rain, I needed air. Poirot glanced down. Curious, then, that your shoes are dry. No mud, no damp, and the side corridor has footprints. Yours, perhaps. Felix looked at him sharply. What exactly are you implying? Nothing, monsieur. Only observing. It is, as you English say, my little hobby. Felix gave a derisive snort and turned away. Clara, seated in the corner, watched the exchange anxiously. Later, Poirot found her alone in the parlour, her hands knotted in her lap. You are fond of Lady Cecilia? He asked gently. Clara hesitated. She could be cruel, but I admired her strength. I owed her everything, and yet she had no intention of leaving you a significant share in the will. Clara's mouth tightened. I knew that. It didn't matter. Poirot tilted his head. You saw the value of the bracelet, non? And yet you did not take the missing gem. Clara paled. Missing? One stone is gone. Poirot said softly, perhaps dislodged in haste or removed deliberately. She said nothing. Poirot leaned forward, lowering his voice. You were near the study last night. Clara closed her eyes. Yes, I went to speak with her. I wanted to ask her to reconsider, for Felix's sake. But the door was locked. I heard voices inside. Voices? Poirot's brows rose. Plural? She nodded. Tears in her eyes. A man's voice. Angry. I didn't recognize it, not clearly. I left. I didn't want to be seen. Poirot sat back. So, Lady Cecilia was not alone. That changes everything. That evening, Poirot stood again in the study. The sun dipped low over the hills outside, casting long shadows on the carpet. He knelt, inspecting the mark on the floor where the bracelet had landed. There was something odd about the break, sharp, uneven, unnatural. The clasp appeared warped, not simply undone. He rose and studied the fireplace. A faint scorched scent lingered near the poker. Poirot picked it up. The tip was darkened, still faintly warm. He narrowed his eyes. A bracelet could be broken by hand. But why use heat? Poirot turned slowly, the lines of the puzzle beginning to form in his mind. Someone had been here after her death. Someone had broken the bracelet intentionally. But why? To destroy something or to send a message? He reached for the sapphire. Shards again. One piece bore a curious mark, a thin line of residue. Chemical, resin, or something more sinister. Poirot tucked the piece into his pocket. The truth was close. It often was, when men lied and women feared and legacies turned to dust. He stepped into the hall, where Inspector Brent waited, arms folded. Well, Brent asked, found your ghost? Poirot smiled faintly. Not yet, mon ami, he said. But I believe I have found a voice in the silence. Brent frowned. What does that mean? Poirot gave no answer. Instead, he turned back to the study, just as the sun dipped fully below the hills. There, in the half-light, the broken bracelet still gleamed. Chapter 3. Poirot accepts the case. You believe she was murdered? Clara Hensley's voice quivered as she stood across from Hercule Poirot in the modest sitting room of the Red Fox Inn. The fire crackled softly, but neither of them paid it much attention. Her hands were wrapped tightly around a cup of untouched tea. Poirot, perfectly composed, leaned back in his armchair. "Mademoiselle," he said gently, "I believe there are questions that must be asked. If the death were so simple as Inspector Brent insists, then why do the details refuse to settle?" She looked away. "I shouldn't be here. The inspector wouldn't like it." Poirot smiled faintly. "No, I do not imagine he would. But the truth, mademoiselle, often arrives through inconvenient routes." Clara's eyes flicked toward him. "Then you will help." Poirot folded his hands. "I will ask the questions others do not wish to ask. That is what I do." She released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. By noon, Poirot was back at Montrose Hall. Inspector Brent met him at the door with narrowed eyes. "Still poking about, are you?" "But, of course," Poirot replied cheerfully. "Curiosity. It is a difficult habit to break." Brent huffed. "There's nothing to see. Autopsy results will take days, and until then, we assume heart failure." Poirot adjusted his cuffs. "May I see Lady Cecilia's bedroom? Her dressing habits interest me." Brent looked as though he wished to protest, but finally gestured. A constable to lead the way. In the bedroom, Poirot moved with precision. The jewelry box on the vanity was open, its contents arranged with Lady Cecilia's typical order. Yet the space for the sapphire bracelet was empty. "Strange," Poirot said aloud, "that she wore it so consistently even to bed, according to Clara, and yet last night she died with it still on, at her writing desk. That is devotion to symbolism." He turned to the maid standing in the doorway. "Elsie," he said kindly, "did Lady Cecilia always wear the bracelet?" "Oh yes, sir, every day." She said it reminded her who she was. Poirot nodded. "Merci, and yesterday morning I helped her dress. She was wearing it when I left her in the study before breakfast." Poirot's eyes sparkled. Before breakfast. So she had been using the study most of the morning? "Yes, sir. She's spent a lot of time in there this week. Letters and such, and no visitors before dinner. Only the Reverend, sir. He came round just before lunch." Poirot's brow rose. "Did he stay long?" "Not too long." "I think Lady Cecilia grew cross with him." Poirot thanked her, then turned back to the room. A small corner of paper peeked from beneath the dressing table. He retrieved it, a torn scrap of a letter, written in sharp black ink. "Cannot in good conscience support such a revelation. It will cause irreparable harm." There was no name, no salutation. But the handwriting, he thought, might belong to the Reverend. Back in the study, Poirot returned to the fireplace. The poker was still resting neatly in its stand, its tip darkened. Poirot examined the grate. It had been used recently and faint. Traces of ash clung to the base. Something had been burned. He was sure of it. Something small like a letter. He looked once more at the bracelet fragments, now carefully gathered in a handkerchief on the desk. Poirot unwrapped them, inspecting each piece with his small magnifying glass. The missing sapphire, still unaccounted for, troubled him. But more than that was the way the metal had been twisted. not snapped, warped, as though it had been softened by heat. Poirot glanced toward the poker again. Later that afternoon, Poirot found Felix Montrose in the garden, smoking with short, angry drags, still investigating. Felix asked without looking up. "I find myself intrigued." "Yes," Poirot replied. Felix gave a humorless chuckle. "You won't find anything, you know. Cecilia was old and cruel. Her heart just gave up. Convenient for her, really." Poirot said nothing. Instead, he observed, Felix wore a fine coat, but his collar was rumpled. His fingernails were bitten. His eyes bloodshot, not from grief, Poirot thought, but from worry. "You cared for her, despite everything?" Felix scoffed. "I tolerated her. She took everything from me long before she rewrote that damned will." "You speak as though you had already lost." "She made sure of it. No allowance, no control over the estate. And then to find she's giving it all to that nobody. Cousin, you confronted her." Felix looked sharply at Poirot. "And if I did, she was alive after dinner. I went to speak with her," Felix said finally, "just to talk. She locked the study. I knocked. She wouldn't answer. And then I left. What more do you want?" Poirot smiled. "Only the truth. It has a habit of revealing itself in due time." Felix turned away. Poirot spent the evening reassembling the bracelet fragments. His hands moved deftly, like a puzzle master fitting together shards of a mirror. It was a small thing, easily overlooked, but the break deliberate, he was now certain had occurred after her death. The tea untouched, the bracelet broken, the poker darkened, the study locked. Poirot's mind turned steadily. Symbolism, message, control. Who would benefit from such theatre? Just before retiring for the night, Poirot walked out onto the front steps. The wind had stilled. The garden lay quiet. Clara stood by the yew hedge, arms wrapped around herself. She looked up as he approached. "She wasn't meant to die like this," she said softly. Poirot tilted his head. "You knew about the new will?" "Yes, she told me." "Were you angry?" Clara's lip trembled. "I was afraid, not for myself, for Felix. He has debts. She didn't know how deep they ran. Perhaps she did." Clara looked at him sharply. Poirot nodded toward the study window, now dark. "She knew more than she let on, mademoiselle. Of this, I am certain. And when someone like Lady Cecilia acts, she does not do so blindly." He turned back toward the door. "And yet," he murmured, "something she saw must have frightened even her." Clara did not answer. Poirot stepped inside, the door closing with a soft thud behind him. Chapter 4. A family's fractious Felix Montrose was already seated in the drawing-room. When Poirot arrived the next morning, his back to the window, hands steepled beneath his chin, a pot of untouched coffee rested on the side table, growing cold. "I take it this isn't a social call," Felix said dryly as Poirot entered. "I never call without purpose, monsieur," Poirot replied. "May I sit?" Felix gave a curt nod. Poirot lowered himself gently into the opposite armchair. "You mentioned debts yesterday." Felix's brow twitched. "Did I?" "You implied that your circumstances had grown difficult." Did Lady Cecilia know? Felix poured himself a cup of the cold coffee and took a sip before grimacing. She knew. She took pleasure in it. My father left me with little, and what I had, well, I was not wise. Cards. Felix gave a short, bitter laugh. And horses, and a woman or two. And she offered you no assistance? She said it was a lesson I needed to. Poirot looked out the window, where the chapel garden was lost in the fog. I do not yet name them. Inspector, he said softly, but I believe the poisoner feared her voice more than her wealth. Something Lady Cecilia knew, something she had begun to share became too dangerous. Brent hesitated. The autopsy? Poirot lifted a finger. We'll show only what the poison did not hide. But the bracelet. Mon ami, that is where the truth lies. He reached into his coat and handed Brent the sapphire shard in the cloth. Brent turned it over. Belladonna. Poirot nodded. Brent stared at it, then gave a low whistle. So, the killer poisoned the bracelet and waited. Poirot said, no, they ensured she wore it. Ensured she would die without protest. And when it was done, they broke it to hide the tampering. But in doing so, they left behind the very clue they feared most. Brent looked at him. You think they panicked? Poirot's eyes narrowed. I think they underestimated me. That night, Poirot sat once more at Lady Cecilia's desk. He opened her journal pages of clipped entries, sharp and decisive. Most were about accounts, estate repairs, letters unsent. But one short entry stood out, dated for days before her death. I found the truth. It changes everything. I fear it will not be welcomed. But I must act. Poirot stared at the words. The truth. Something about Andrew Talbot. About herself. And perhaps about someone else in Montrose Hall. He closed the journal. The pieces were gathering. Motive, means, opportunity. And at the center a bracelet that had once bound love, now used to bind death. Chapter 6. The boy from Leicester. Following day, Hercule Poirot sat perfectly upright on the bench outside Montrose Hall, a letter in his gloved hands and a small suitcase at his feet. The air was still damp from an early drizzle. At exactly 10 minutes past 10, a motor car turned up the gravel path, tires crunching softly. A young man stepped out, a tall figure, perhaps 25, with clear eyes and a nervous tension in his shoulders. His tweed jacket was worn at the cuffs, and his suitcase bore the faded initials A.T. Andrew Talbot. Poirot rose. The young man nodded, wary. Yes, you must be Monsieur Poirot. I am he. Poirot extended a hand. You received Lady Cecilia's letter? Yes. It arrived yesterday morning. Andrew glanced up at the towering house. I had no idea she remembered me. Poirot observed him carefully. You knew her well. Andrew gave a short breath. Barely. My father Arthur Talbot chose to mention her, but it was always vague. She was a distant cousin. I was told a woman of complicated loyalties. Poirot tilted his head. And your father passed away 6 months ago. He looked down. I think he meant to tell me something before the end, but he never did. Poirot gestured toward the door. Then perhaps what he left unsaid. Lady Cecilia intended to correct. Come, there, is much you should know. Inside the parlour, Clara poured tea as Andrew sat, still visibly uncertain. "I don't understand," he said at last. "She summoned me, but now she's dead." Poirot nodded solemnly. "Lady Cecilia passed 3 days ago. The official cause is heart failure." Andrew frowned. "But you don't believe that?" "I believe her death was helped along by very deliberate hands," Poirot replied, "and that it is connected to you, Monsieur Talbot." "Me?" "Your inheritance, your blood, your father's past." Clara looked at Andrew quietly. "She changed the will. You were to inherit everything." Andrew went pale. "But why? We were practically strangers." Poirot produced the stack of letters he had found in Cecilia's parlour drawer. "These," he said, "may help explain." Andrew took them hesitantly. He read the first one slowly, lips pressed in a thin line. "She and my father were close," he said softly, "more than close." Poirot said gently, "I believe they shared something deeper, and I believe you, Monsieur Talbot, are not merely a cousin." Andrew looked up sharply. "You mean?" Poirot nodded. "It is not yet proven, but I suspect Lady Cecilia knew, or at least suspected, that you were her son." Clara's teacup trembled slightly in its saucer. "But why hide it?" Andrew asked, stunned. Poirot steepled his fingers. "In her youth, Lady Cecilia would have faced scandal. To have a child out of wedlock even with a man like Arthur Talbot, it would have ruined her. So the child was hidden, raised by the father, and the truth buried." Andrew swallowed. "So she left everything to me to make amends." Poirot nodded. "And in doing so, threatened those who had everything to lose from such a revelation." Meanwhile, Inspector Brent was reviewing the letters Cecilia had sent to Andrew, now retrieved from the village postmaster's duplicate register. It was short, handwritten, the ink still bold. "I have wronged your father, and by doing so, wronged you. Come to Montrose Hall. I have set matters in motion. We must speak in person." Brent tapped the paper, frowning. "This wasn't about inheritance," he muttered. "It was about truth." Later that evening, Poirot and Andrew walked the estates. Southern lawn. The mist had cleared, revealing the moors in the far distance. "She wrote to me once before," Andrew said suddenly. "I was 12. The letter said I was clever and brave, that I must remember where I come from." Poirot glanced at him. "Did you ask your father?" He denied it, said it was a mistake. "But he kept the letter in a locked drawer." Poirot stopped walking. "Then it was not a mistake. It was a seed." Andrew's gaze drifted back to the manor. "So someone here knew, and wanted it buried again." Poirot nodded. "And more than that, they feared exposure, not only for inheritance, but for the web of lies it would unravel." Andrew turned to him. "You think the bracelet the poisoning was to silence her? I am certain. And you think the killer is still in the house?" Poirot's eyes did not blink. "Oh yes, monsieur, very much so." That night, a storm rolled over the estate. Poirot sat in the study, the broken bracelet laid out before him like a map of betrayal. Clara knocked lightly and entered. "Is it true, then, that Andrew is her son?" "I believe so." "And she never told anyone?" "Perhaps she told one person Poirot said slowly. Perhaps that person tried to stop her. Perhaps even begged. Clara looked away. You think it was me? I think you were devoted to her and frightened. Clara sank into the chair. She was planning to announce it in the village. Have the solicitor draft something public. She said it was time everyone knew the truth. Poirot nodded, and someone decided there would be no announcement. Clara covered her face. She didn't deserve to die like that. No, Poirot said softly. But murderers seldom concern themselves with what is deserved. At that moment, Reverend Blakely stood alone in the chapel, staring at the crucifix above the altar. He muttered a prayer, though the words caught in his throat. From his coat, he withdrew a folded page, the final draft of Lady Cecilia's written confession. He burned it in the candle flame. His lips moved, voiceless. Forgive us. Chapter 7. A whisper in the Chapelthy morning. After the storm, the air outside Montrose Hall was unusually still. The skies had cleared, but a heaviness lingered, as if something in the earth itself had shifted during the night. Poirot walked the garden path slowly, cane in hand, deep in thought. He had seen too many lies dressed in propriety to mistake the silence of grief for innocence. He turned toward the chapel. The doors were slightly ajar. Inside. The Reverend knelt at the front pew, his back straight but unmoving. The scent of melted wax hung in the air. A candle flickered low in its holder. Poirot entered quietly. Bon matin, Monsieur le Reverend, he said gently. Blakely did not turn. Monsieur Poirot, you keep early vigils. The Reverend stood slowly. Some mornings demand reflection. Poirot's gaze moved to the candle and the pile of ash in the brass tray beneath it. He stepped closer, hands behind his back. There was paper burned here. Blakely hesitated. Old sermon notes. Poirot's brows lifted slightly. And yet I see the faint outline of printed heading Lady Cecilia's crest. Curious sermon. Material. Blakely turned, voice firm. She entrusted me with certain documents. Matters of the soul. And you burned them? Blakely's jaw tightened. It was not my place to interfere with her death. None, Poirot said softly. But perhaps it was your place to protect her truth. Blakely looked away. You knew, Poirot said. You knew about Andrew. You knew she meant to make it public. The Reverend nodded reluctantly. She asked for my counsel. I warned her against it. Why? Poirot stepped forward. Was it shame or something more? Blakely's voice dropped. I served this community for 30 years. Cecilia's revelation would have shattered not only her legacy, but others, Arthur Talbot's memory, even the church's reputation. There was no mercy in what she intended. So you burned her words. I could not stop her in life, Blakely murmured. But in death, I thought perhaps I could preserve some dignity. Poirot shook his head slowly. You destroyed evidence. Mon ami. And though I do not believe you killed her, you are no longer a neutral man in this tale. Blakely said nothing. Poirot stepped away. As he left the chapel. His voice echoed behind him. Covering a truth, even with holy intentions, does not cleanse it. It only darkens the shadow. Back in the hall, Poirot found Clara seated at the breakfast table. She was staring at an envelope in her hands. pale and rigid. "It arrived this morning," she said as Poirot entered, addressed to Lady Cecilia, from a solicitor in Leicester. Poirot took the envelope and examined the seal. It was untouched. He opened it delicately and read the letter aloud. "Dear Lady Cecilia, per your request, I enclose the draft acknowledgment of paternity for Mr. Andrew Talbot, with your stated intent to register him as your natural son and rightful heir. As instructed, we await your signature for processing. Kindly confirm within 7 days. Yours, Geoffrey Maddox and Brooke, solicitors." Clara closed her eyes. She was really going to do it. Poirot folded the letter. Carefully, she had made her decision. And someone very near must have known she was close to formalizing it. He rose. "Tell me, Mademoiselle, who had access to this desk after her death?" Clara thought for a moment. "Only the housemaid and Felix. He asked if he could remove some of his books before the study was sealed." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Books? Yes, they'd been left in the cabinet." Poirot nodded. "Then I must speak to him." He found Felix in the stables, brushing one of the horses with jerky, impatient strokes. "You seem restless this morning, monsieur." Felix didn't look up. "They say it's going to rain again." "Perhaps." Poirot stepped closer. "You removed some books from Lady Cecilia's study?" Felix shrugged. "Only ones I'd left in the cabinet. Poetry volumes. Old things." "And you did not see a letter from her solicitor?" Felix turned, eyes narrowed. "What are you implying?" "I imply nothing, monsieur. I inquire." Poirot's gaze was steady. Cecilia had received confirmation. A legal draft acknowledging Andrew Talbot as her son. It had only to be signed. Felix paled slightly. So that was her game. Game? She wanted to humiliate me, disown me, pass the estate to someone who didn't even know he was family. Poirot said quietly she did not intend humiliation. She intended correction. Felix's mouth twisted. "And that makes it better." Poirot did not answer. Felix turned back to the horse, brushing with renewed force. Maybe she deserved to be exposed. But no one has the right to rewrite a life like that. Poirot watched him. Unless that life was built on a lie. Felix froze. Then, without a word, he dropped the brush and left the stable. That night, Poirot sat in the drawing-room. The letter from the solicitor spread before him. He examined the edges sharp, clean, no tampering, no sign of interference. It had arrived too late. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the sapphire fragment once more. His fingers closed over it. Clara entered, holding a small velvet box. "This was in her bedroom," she said softly. "I never opened it. I thought, perhaps you should." Poirot took it and opened the lid. Inside lay the missing sapphire, smooth, polished, still set in a bent gold mount. "A piece broken in haste," Poirot murmured. "But why keep it hidden?" Clara looked puzzled. She wouldn't have dropped it. Poirot examined the box more closely. A note beneath the stone read, "For him, when the truth is known." He looked up. She meant to give it to Andrew. A token, perhaps even proof. Then why was it separated? Clara whispered. Poirot stood slowly, because someone feared it. Not for what it was, but for what it would prove. His eyes moved toward the door. Tomorrow, he said, we gather them all. The time has come for truth. Chapter 8. The gathering stormed drawing room of Montrose Hall had not seen such company since the Christmas of '39. Now, with the storm outside reduced to a drizzle, its fire glowed not with cheer, but with the slow, simmering heat of unease. Poirot stood at the hearth, hands behind his back, eyes calmly scanning the faces before him. Clara, pale and composed. Felix, slouched with arms folded, face unreadable. Reverend Blakely, seated stiffly near the corner, eyes lowered. And Andrew Talbot, silent, still holding the velvet box with the missing sapphire inside. No one spoke. Poirot cleared his throat. Ms. Amos, we are gathered, as you may have guessed, because I now understand how Lady Cecilia Montrose died, and, more importantly, why. Felix scoffed quietly, but Poirot ignored it. She was not the victim of sudden misfortune, nor of accident, he continued. She was murdered with purpose and precision. Clara swallowed. You're sure? Oui, mademoiselle. I am certain. Lady Cecilia wore that sapphire bracelet every day of her life, almost as an extension of her identity, and someone, knowing this, laced it with belladonna, a poison that enters slowly through the skin, mimicking a heart attack in its final stages. Blakely murmured, My God. Poirot nodded. Oh yes, God was invoked, but not obeyed, I fear. He turned to the desk where the shattered bracelet fragments lay ranged like broken bones. The note Cecilia left for him, when the truth is known, now sat beside them. Poirot continued. Lady Cecilia had, in her final weeks, resolved to make a declaration, a long-buried truth, that Andrew Talbot, the quiet young man seated here, was not merely her cousin but her son. Andrew looked up. She never said it aloud, not to me. She feared the storm it would bring, Poirot said gently. But she had already begun. She rewrote her will. She contacted her solicitor, and she sent you a letter inviting you. Here. He faced the others. Someone in this room discovered her plan, and that person acted not out of fury, but out of calculation. Poirot paused, letting his words settle. Let us look at the motives. His gaze moved to Felix. You, Monsieur Montrose, stood to lose everything. Your inheritance, your name, your position in the estate, all handed to a man who, until last week, you did not know existed. Felix's mouth twitched. I didn't kill her. Perhaps not with your own hands, Poirot said calmly. But your rage, your sense of betrayal was no secret. You entered her study the night she died. Did you not? Felix hesitated. I knocked. She didn't answer. Poirot nodded. Because she was already slipping into unconsciousness. The bracelet had done its work. He turned now to Blakely. And you, Reverend, you knew the truth for years. You witnessed the beginning of this tragedy. You guided Lady Cecilia when she asked for counsel. I begged her not to speak, Blakely said hoarsely. Not because I hated the truth, but because I feared what it would do to this community. Poirot's gaze softened. And so you burned her confession. You tried to silence her after death, just as others tried to silence her before it. Blakely lowered his head. Yes, but you did not kill her. Poirot now looked to Clara. And you, Mademoiselle, loyal, always in the background, the trusted companion. Clara's voice was faint. I loved her, yes, and you feared what would happen to her name when the truth came out. She was preparing to shame herself in the eyes of the very society she guarded for decades. She spoke of an announcement. She was going to name Andrew publicly. Clara nodded slowly. I told her she'd ruin everything. And then Poirot asked gently. Clara's eyes filled. She told me to fetch the bracelet from her drawer. She wanted to polish it. She was in the study. I brought it in. Felix sat forward. Wait, what are you saying? Clara looked at Poirot, and the room fell still. She was already preparing tea. Clara whispered, I don't know what came over me. I had some of the tonic Blakely gave her once she'd kept it for headaches. I crushed the tablets, wiped it along the inside of the bracelet clasp, behind the sapphire setting. It looked clean. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. She died wearing your kindness, he said softly. Clara's voice broke. I only meant to stop her, just to make her ill, to make her pause, reconsider. Poirot raised a hand. But the dose was fatal. I didn't know, she whispered. She was strong, I thought. Just enough to keep her in bed a few days, long enough to change her mind. Felix's voice rose, sharp and bitter. You killed her to protect her pride. Clara turned to him, tearful. You would have torn her to shreds in the papers. You said so. You said she was senile, mad. She knew that. She feared you. Felix. Andrew said nothing. He stared at the floor. Poirot stepped back from the hearth. It was not the act of hatred, he said gently, but it was murder nonetheless. And Lady Cecilia, who planned to use that bracelet to symbolize truth, died by it instead. Clara shook her head, almost numb. She trusted me. She did, Poirot said. And trust, when broken, is the sharpest poison of all. Brent entered the room just then, having been summoned hours before. Poirot looked to him and nodded once. Clara did not resist. She stood and walked past them all, out the door, her steps quiet but steady. Later that night, Poirot sat with Andrew on the steps of the manor, the mist curling along the ground once more. She died trying to set something right, Andrew said quietly. Poirot nodded. She died reaching for peace, and in a way, perhaps she has found it. Andrew opened the velvet box and turned the sapphire over in his fingers. She wanted me to have this, and now you do. Andrew looked up. Do I belong here? Poirot gave a faint smile. You belong wherever the truth does, monsieur. And that, now, is here. The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying with it the last whisper of a secret no longer hidden. Chapter 9. The Weight of Inheritance Days. After Clara's arrest passed with a strange quiet. Not the hush of mourning, but the strained, uncertain pause of a house rebalancing itself after a long-held truth had dropped like a stone. Into its center, Andrew Talbot remained at Montrose Hall, not as a guest, but now as heir. The estates. Staff still referred to him cautiously as Mr. Talbot. and Felix had taken to disappearing for hours at a time, either walking the moors or loitering in the public house in the village. Poirot, ever watchful, remained close not for fear of violence, but because the mystery, though solved in law, still felt unsettled in spirit. On the third morning, Andrew found Poirot seated in Lady Cecilia's study. The detective was reviewing her journal once again, flipping through pages of entries that now read like quiet cries rather than domestic records. She was meticulous, Andrew said, hovering in the doorway. Poirot looked up, smiling gently, yes, and conflicted. This was her legacy. It bound her tightly. She gave up much to preserve it. Andrew stepped inside, including me. Poirot gestured for him to sit. Your father protected you in her stead. She never truly let him go, nor did he let her. Andrew nodded slowly. She wrote once. My father let me read it before he died. Said it was from an old friend. It was unsigned, but he kept it locked away. He paused. Do you think he knew she planned to change everything? I think he hoped for it, Poirot said, but did not believe she ever would. Andrew looked around the room. This place doesn't feel like mine. It feels haunted. Poirot did not answer immediately. He walked to the mantelpiece, where the broken pieces of the bracelet had now been carefully arranged within a glass case. She meant it as a gift, Poirot said softly, and it became a weapon. Andrew stared at it. Clara said she didn't mean to kill her. I believe her, Poirot said, but intention does not undo consequence. Andrew's hands clenched in his lap. She meant to stop the truth. Poirot nodded, because she feared it would undo the woman she loved. Later that afternoon, Poirot made his way to the vicarage. Though the case was closed in official eyes, there remained something unsaid, something that still whispered along the edges of Poirot's thoughts. Reverend Blakely opened the door with a tight expression. Back again, Monsieur Poirot? He asked. Poirot bowed slightly, only to satisfy a final curiosity. Reverend, a small one. Blakely stepped aside, letting him in. The sitting room was modest, as always. Books lined the shelves. A fire burned low. You burned Lady Cecilia's. Confession, Poirot began. Blakely looked away. I did. You said it was to preserve her dignity. Yes. Poirot walked slowly around the room. But what if I told you she had written to? Blakely blinked. One sent to her solicitor, the other hidden here. He turned to face the clergyman. Did she give it to you before she died, or did you find it after? Blakely's jaw tightened. I found it in her prayer book. It had been returned to me after one of our meetings. Poirot nodded. And yet, you destroyed the only written proof that she intended to name Andrew as her son. I destroyed it because it was incomplete, Blakely said suddenly, voice rising. She hadn't signed it. There was no seal, no witness. What would it have accomplished? A whisper of acclaim, or a thread for others to follow? Poirot said quietly, but you feared the damage more than you feared the lie. Blakely sat down. Weary, I told her once truth may set you free, but it always demands a toll. Poirot stood for a long moment, then bowed his head. I do not judge you, Reverend, but the truth came all the same, And it did not come through confession, it came through murder. Back at Montrose Hall, Felix paced the hallway outside the drawing room, hands shoved in his coat pockets. He found Andrew seated inside, sipping a whiskey that had likely belonged to his aunt. "You planning to redecorate?" Felix asked, voice tight. Andrew looked up. "Come, not yet. Keep the portraits." Felix gestured toward the wall, her over the fireplace, still looking down at us all. "I suppose so." Felix stepped inside, a shadow across his face. "You know she never let me call her aunt. Said it lacked the dignity she required." Andrew gave a faint smile. "She didn't lack dignity." Felix's mouth twisted. "No, she hoarded it like silver, until it rusted." Andrew placed the glass down. "You blame me." Felix sat heavily. "No, not really. You didn't ask for any of this. But it still feels like I've lost everything." Andrew hesitated. "I'd rather not lose the only family I've got." Felix gave a bitter laugh. "You don't know me? Then let me." They sat in silence for a moment. "I spent years thinking she'd never let me in," Felix said. "Turns out she was just keeping the door locked for someone else." Andrew nodded. "And now it's open. We decide what to do with it." That evening, Poirot stood once more in the chapel, alone now. He studied the candle. The ashes were long gone, the secret burned, but the truth remained. Lady Cecilia had died reaching toward honesty, a late, desperate act of redemption. And yet, her death had opened what her life could not: understanding, reconciliation even in the ashes of betrayal. Poirot bowed his head. He whispered a line to the empty pews, quoting scripture softly, but with a distinctly Poirot twist. "The truth shall set you free, but only if you let it speak before someone else silences it." The wind stirred outside. A new peace was settling over Montrose Hall. Not the peace of perfection, but of revelation. Chapter 10. A portrait refermed next morning broke with a soft gold hue, the sort that filtered gently through old windows, and softened the harsh outlines of grief. Montrose Hall remained hushed, but the silence now felt contemplative, not burdened, as if the house, too, was finally catching its breath after years of watching truth gather dust in corners. Poirot sat at the long dining table, his breakfast untouched. His gaze, sharp beneath drooping lids, was fixed on the far wall, specifically on the large oil portrait of Lady Cecilia Montrose. She stood as she had always stood, composed, chin lifted, hands folded before her like a sovereign in mourning. Her eyes, a steely grey, seemed to challenge the very air. He did not flinch when Andrew entered behind him. "Odd, isn't it?" Andrew said quietly. "How someone can look so alive in paint." Poirot nodded slowly. Portraits preserve the face, but never the burden behind it. Andrew took the seat opposite. "I asked Clara once if that painting flattered her. She said it wasn't about flattery, it was about legacy." Poirot's brow lifted. "And now you must carry that legacy." Andrew looked down at his hands. "Everyone keeps saying that, as if legacy is a simple inheritance. But this place, this name, it came wrapped in silence." Poirot leaned forward. "Silence is a choice, monsieur. It can guard or it can destroy. Lady Cecilia chose silence, until it no longer served her. Andrew gave a faint smile. You make her sound brave. Poirot shook his head. No, I make her sound human. Later that morning, Inspector Brent arrived at Montrose Hall with a formal update. Poirot joined him in the study. Clara's been remanded, Brent said, sliding a document across the desk. She's confessed in full, though she's adamant. It wasn't meant to kill. Poirot read the page carefully. The Crown will not take that as excuse. I think. No. Brent rubbed his jaw. Still, they might lessen the charge to manslaughter, considering intent. Her solicitors already preparing a plea. Poirot closed the file. And the bracelet, in evidence, along with the tonic she used. That part's airtight. Poirot nodded, thoughtful. Still, Brent continued, there's something I don't like about it. Poirot looked up. You think she lies? Brent hesitated. Not about what she did, about why. She said she crushed the tablets into the bracelet to slow Lady Cecilia down. But that level of planning, it suggests something deeper. Not panic, not impulse. Poirot leaned back. Perhaps she had help, or perhaps she believed she was doing Cecilia's bidding in a twisted way. Brent frowned. You mean Cecilia wanted to die? Poirot tapped a finger on the desk. None. Not suicide. But perhaps she spoke of the pressure, the dread of exposure. Clara might have taken it upon herself to protect her lady by force. Brent said nothing for a moment. Then he asked, and Andrew? He will stay, Poirot said. He has much to do. That evening, Andrew wandered through the gallery wing of Montrose Hall. Portraits stared down from every angle, dead men in medals, haughty women in pearls. Generations of Montroses locked in frozen expressions of authority. He stopped before a smaller frame tucked beside a corner window. It was a sketch charcoal, unfinished, but there was no mistaking the subject. A young man, unsmiling, with the faintest slant of Cecilia's brow. The name beneath it read, AT-1915. Andrew touched the edge of the frame. She kept this. Poirot's voice came from behind him. Yes, in a locked drawer in the study. Andrew turned. Then she knew. Long before she told anyone, Poirot stepped beside him. She knew from the moment you were born. But she could not say it not then. Andrew looked at the sketch again. Why didn't she finish it? Poirot's eyes narrowed, then softened. Because she feared looking too long at what she could not claim. They stood in silence. Then Andrew asked, Do you think she ever regretted it? Giving me up? Poirot considered. But I think she feared losing the world she built more than she feared losing you. That is not a justification, only a truth. Andrew nodded, quiet. Then it's my turn to choose differently. Poirot raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Andrew gave a faint smile. I'm changing the will. Poirot blinked. So soon? She left it all to me. But it wasn't all meant for me. Felix deserves something. And Clara, if she survives, this should be looked after. Poirot's eyes warmed. You are wise, Monsieur Talbot. Andrew turned back to the sketch. No, just trying to be better than the ghosts in this house. The next morning, Felix joined Andrew at breakfast. I've been thinking, Felix said without preamble. I might take a post in India. Estate management. Same line of work. Clean break. Andrew looked at him. You don't have to run. Felix gave a thin smile. I don't want to end up like her, bound by land and expectation until there's nothing left. Andrew nodded. Then go. But come back someday. Felix hesitated. You're a better Montrose than I ever was. I'm not trying to be one, Andrew replied. I'm just trying to honor what's left. Felix stood, nodded once, then walked out. No drama, no ceremony, only a quiet farewell between two men who might, under other names, have been brothers. Poirot stood once more in the garden as the afternoon sun lit up the estate's brickwork. The mist had finally cleared, not just from the moors, but from the house, the hearts inside it, and from the detective's mind. Lady Cecilia's portrait still hung in the dining room, but it no longer loomed. It lingered, and the bracelet, now secured in evidence, would never again be worn. Poirot, mustache neatly trimmed, turned to leave Dot as he walked toward the waiting car. He allowed himself one final thought. It is not always the murderer who ends a life. Sometimes it is the years of silence, the thousand unsaid words, that do the killing. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Montrose Hall stood still. Its secrets finally aired. Its legacy passed on not in whispers, but in choice. Chapter 11. Shadows beneath the velvet weather had turned again. Low clouds loomed over Montrose Hall, casting long shadows across its lawns. The scent of rain was in the air, but it had not yet fallen. An uneasy stillness settled in the atmosphere, like the house was waiting for something it couldn't name. Poirot had intended to leave that morning, his cases already packed, and the hired car summoned to the front gate. But a letter delayed his departure. A small, crumpled envelope had been delivered by the housemaid. No stamp, no signature, only his name, written in an uncertain, slanted hand. He opened it slowly. Before you go, look again at what she gave him. There are things even you have not seen. There was no other message. Poirot stood in silence for a long moment, then turned back toward the house. He found Andrew in the study, seated by the fireplace, examining the velvet box containing the broken sapphire. This stone, Andrew murmured as Poirot entered. It's beautiful, and yet it killed her. Poirot gestured gently. May I? Andrew passed it over. Poirot sat, holding the small object delicately in his palm. He turned it over once, twice, then held it up to the light. There's something inside the setting, he said softly. Andrew leaned forward. What do you mean? Poirot reached into his pocket and withdrew a slender tool. With slow precision, he pried gently at the bent clasp behind the sapphire's mount. The gold creaked faintly. A slip of paper emerged, folded tightly, no larger than a postage stamp. Poirot unfolded it. Andrew's breath caught. It was a note in Lady Cecilia's handwriting. For Andrew. My truth, my shame, my son. Poirot exhaled. She hid this, knowing it might be the only evidence to survive. Andrew took it with trembling hands. She really meant it. Poirot nodded. She planned everything. Even her fear did not erase her intent. Andrew looked up. Then Clara must have seen this note too. That's why she panicked. That's why she acted. Poirot's expression sharpened. No, Clara never mentioned the note, and if she had seen it, she would not have risked destroying the bracelet. Andrew frowned. But she said she wiped the inside of the clasp. Poirot's eyes darkened. Precisely. But this paper, it was tucked behind the sapphire, not the clasp, carefully rolled. If one was simply poisoning the inside surface, there'd be no reason to find it, let alone disturb it. Andrew straightened. Then you think someone else put the poison there? Poirot nodded slowly. I do. Back in the village, Poirot visited the local chemist. He spoke with the assistant on duty, presenting a dated receipt found in Clara's drawer, a purchase of aspirin and valerian root. Did she ever buy belladonna? Poirot asked. The young man frowned. Clara? No, sir. I don't think she ever did. But, yes? About 2 months ago, the Reverend picked up an order with a bottle of extract. It was under his name, but he said it was for Cecilia Montrose. For her nerves. Poirot's lips thinned. And was it? I assumed so. He paid in cash. Didn't seem unusual. Poirot thanked him and left at once. The vicarage was quiet when Poirot arrived. Blakely answered the door, wearing his cassock, and a look of wary resignation. I thought you'd gone, he said. I was delayed, Poirot said. By the truth, Blakely stepped aside. Then come in. Say what you must. They sat once more in the sitting room. The fire was unlit now. The air inside had cooled. Reverend, Poirot began, Clara did not kill Lady Cecilia. Blakely blinked. Of course she did. She confessed. Poirot nodded. But she confessed to placing poison along the clasp of the bracelet, not behind the gem. He placed the tiny note on the table. Blakely stared at it. She left this for Andrew, Poirot said, hidden, carefully, and whoever placed the poison behind the gem did so after seeing that note. Because they knew then, beyond doubt, that she would follow through. Blakely's voice trembled. You're suggesting you, Poirot, said softly. You poisoned the bracelet. Clara only believed she had. Blakely rose suddenly. That's absurd. I burned the confession. Yes, but I did not kill her. Poirot stood to, calm but firm. You purchased the belladonna. You admitted to fearing her revelation. You spoke of shame and the toll of truth. But, Reverend, what toll was that? Truly, Blakely's. Shoulders slumped. She was going to announce it, he whispered, in front of the whole congregation. She wanted me to bless this ceremony, a symbolic welcome for her son, a public acknowledgement. His voice cracked. I told her it would. Shame the church. I begged her not to do it. Poirot stepped closer, and when she refused, you acted. Blakely sank into the chair. It was just a drop, just enough to weaken her, to delay her plans. The same justification Clara gave, Poirot said. But you chose the setting. You hid the poison where it would seep beneath the skin. Blakely bowed his head. I thought I was doing God's work. Poirot's voice was quiet. But God does not ask us to silence truth with poison, mon ami. That evening, Poirot returned to Montrose Hall and found Andrew pacing outside. You were right, Andrew said as Poirot approached. It wasn't her. No, Poirot said. But the guilt Clara carries is not imagined. She believed she was complicit. Andrew exhaled. So what now? Poirot looked out toward the chapel. Now, the Reverend must face what he tried to bury, and you must decide what legacy you build on stone or on truth. Andrew nodded slowly. Stone crumbles. I choose truth. They stood together, shadows stretching long in the fading light. In the study, the velvet box sat closed once more, but the note inside it had changed everything. And this time, no one would burn it. Chapter 12. A test of grace. Rain fell at last. Not in great sheets or thunderous downpours, but in a steady, mournful rhythm. Thin rivulets sliding down the chapel. Windows echoing faintly in the stone gutters. The village lanes were quiet. The church bell, usually rung for evensong, stayed silent. Reverend Blakely had not been seen since the evening before. Word had spread quickly that Poirot had visited him again alone, and that the visit had ended with neither police nor shouting, only stillness. Poirot, meanwhile, remained at Montrose Hall. He had delayed his departure a second time, his brown leather case untouched at the foot of the staircase. That morning, Andrew entered the drawing-room with a frown. Still here? He asked, half expecting Poirot's usual remark about unfinished work. But the detective only nodded. His gaze focused on a stack of old correspondence from Lady Cecilia's desk. There is one final matter, Poirot murmured, before I may rest. Andrew poured himself a cup of coffee. Is it Blakely? Poirot nodded. We. Andrew sat down. Carefully. He hasn't been to the church. No one's seen him. Poirot looked up. A man burdened by sin may hide not from punishment, but from forgiveness. Andrew shifted in his seat. Do you think he'll run? Poirot shook his head. No, but he is a man of ritual. I believe he is preparing to confess, not to the law but to God. Andrew's eyes narrowed. You think he'll take his own life? Poirot didn't answer directly. He was a man who believed he stood for what was right. But when that foundation crumbles, some do not rebuild. They surrender. Poirot walked to the chapel that afternoon. The rain had turned to a soft mist, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and stone. He found the door unlocked. Inside, the candles were lit, fresh ones. Someone had been here recently. Poirot stepped down the aisle slowly. Reverend Blakely was at the altar, not kneeling, just sitting on the front pew, hands clasped loosely, head tilted back, staring at the stained glass window above. He didn't turn when Poirot entered. I wondered when you'd come, Blakely said quietly. Poirot moved to sit beside him. I come not as accuser, monsieur, Poirot said, but as a man who seeks peace for all involved. Blakely gave a faint smile. There's little peace for me now. Do you wish to confess formally? I've already spoken with the bishop. He will make a statement in time. Poirot nodded. Blakely looked at his hands. You know, I spent my life trying to preserve things, appearances, tradition, the sanctity of the family name. I thought I was protecting something sacred. Poirot's voice was soft, but in the end, you preserved only silence. Blakely nodded slowly. She trusted me. She came to me as a friend. And when I saw that note in the bracelet so small, so final, I knew she wouldn't change her mind. I panicked. It wasn't rage. It wasn't malice. It was fear. Poirot said nothing. Blakely continued. I told myself she wouldn't die, that I was only giving her pause. But she was frailer than I knew. Poirot gently placed a hand on his shoulder. You are not the first to mistake fear for virtue. Mon ami. They sat in silence, the rain pattering gently on the chapel roof above. Then Poirot rose. You must speak with Andrew. Blakely looked up sharply. Poirot's expression was firm. It is not absolution you require, it is humility. That evening, the drawing-room was quiet when Andrew entered. Poirot stood near the window, looking out at the gardens still slick with rain. Blakely stood by the fireplace, hat in hand, face drawn. Andrew stopped just inside the door. Poirot stepped aside, letting the two men face each other. Andrew's voice was tight. You knew, didn't you? For years. Blakely bowed his head. Yes, you baptized me. You wrote my name in the parish book under someone else's record. Yes, Andrew's voice rose. And then you tried to stop her. You poisoned the bracelet. Blakely didn't flinch. Yes, there was a long silence. Andrew crossed the room and poured himself a drink. He didn't offer one. I don't hate you, he said finally. I don't even know if I can. But you stood in front of the truth and called it grace. Blakely blinked. I thought I was preserving her dignity. You took her voice, Andrew said coldly. Her final act, her final truth. You turned it into a death sentence. Blakely said nothing. Andrew placed the glass down and turned. She didn't need a priest. She needed a witness. The Reverend's throat worked as he swallowed. Then let me witness this. Now, you are her son, her rightful heir, and everything she meant to say I will say it, publicly. Andrew looked at Poirot, who nodded once. Blakely stepped forward. I will resign, he said. From the parish, from the church. I cannot serve where I have sinned. Poirot raised a brow. That is between you and your God. But your confession must also face the law. Blakely nodded slowly, then let it, as the rain finally ceased. Inspector Brent returned to the hold this time. There was no dramatic arrest. Blakely walked calmly to the waiting car. No cuffs, no crowd. Only the stillness of a man who had shed the last weight of his secrets. Poirot watched from the steps. Andrew stood beside him. She said once that the truth would be the ruin of everything. Andrew murmured. Poirot's eyes remained on the car. And yet, everything remains. Changed, perhaps, but still standing. Andrew nodded. That's something, I suppose. Poirot offered a faint smile. It is the beginning of everything new. Monsieur, the sky was clearing now. Not bright, but brighter as the car disappeared down the drive. The house behind them seemed for the first time not to loom, but to breathe. Chapter 13. Ashes in the garden. The next morning dawned strangely bright, as if nature had forgotten that Montrose Hall had been a house of mourning just days before. Sunlight lanced through the clouds, glinting off wet hedges and stone balustrades. The earth was soft underfoot, and birds sang cautiously in the trees. But inside, The house remained subdued, not grief-stricken now, but contemplative like a portrait whose sitter had finally turned her gaze away. Andrew stood in the rear garden, alone but for the urn in his hands. The ashes were light, too light, he thought, for a woman who had cast such a long shadow. Poirot watched from the terrace above, arms folded neatly, eyes on the quiet ceremony that no clergyman would lead. There would be no scripture, no music, no prayers, just Andrew and the woman who had finally called him son. He knelt by the rose bed, brushed aside the mulch, and tipped the urn. Ash fell like snow into the soil. He didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. Poirot descended the steps slowly, only approaching once Andrew had stood again. She planted these herself, Andrew said, without turning, every spring, even when her hands shook. Poirot glanced at the bare stems. They will bloom again. I'm not sure if I will. Poirot tilted his head. Grief is like the winter, monsieur. Bitter, yes, but temporary. Andrew gave a faint, humorless smile. You have a metaphor for everything, don't you? Poirot shrugged lightly. It is the curse of the philosophical detective. Andrew looked down at his boots. I've spent days asking myself whether she loved me properly. I mean, as a mother should. Poirot said nothing. And I've come to the conclusion, Andrew continued, that she loved me, as best she knew how. But she was never brave enough to let that love breathe, until it was too late. Poirot nodded slowly. Love is often clumsy, monsieur, but honesty it is the rarer courage. Andrew looked toward the house. And what now? Everyone knows. Blakely's gone. Clara might stand trial. Felix has vanished off to London. The whole feels hollow. Poirot studied him, then fill it. With what? With truth, with work, with life. Let it become a house of beginnings instead of endings. Andrew was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. I suppose it starts with what she left behind. Later, that day, Andrew returned to Lady Cecilia's study. Most of her things had been left untouched: books, ledgers, old letters tied in ribbon. He opened the desk drawer, seeking the folders she had used to draft her second will. Inside, he found the expected formal language, amendments, the signature of the solicitor. But beneath the folder, something else lay tucked: a stack of envelopes, all addressed, in her looping script, to names he didn't recognize. Miss L. Cavendish, Devon. Mrs. Trevithick, Cheltenham. E. R. Stone, Eastbourne. He turned to Poirot, who had silently entered behind him. Do you recognize these? Andrew asked. Poirot stepped forward. No, but let us examine them. Andrew opened the first. It was a letter dated 6 years ago. To the woman who raised my boy with kindness, I owe you more than you know. I cannot sign this, but I hope you understand that silence is not the absence of love. The second was similar, and the third, all unsent. Poirot took a slow breath. These women, they were guardians, perhaps, nurses, midwives. Andrew stared at the letters. She kept track of every home I lived in. Poirot nodded. Even if she could not claim you, she never let you out of sight. Andrew's eyes were wet. Why didn't she send them? Because she feared forgiveness, Poirot said gently, and because to reach out might have pulled you too close, might have forced the truth into the light before she was ready. Andrew folded the letters carefully. She watched over me like a ghost, he murmured. And now I'm haunted by the things she never dared say. Poirot touched his arm. Then speak them for her. By week's end, Montrose Hall had begun to stir again. Andrew hosted a modest gathering, nothing grand, just the staff, a few villagers, and Reverend Hargreaves from the neighbouring parish. Blakely's resignation had left the local church adrift, and Cecilia's funeral rites had gone unspoken. Now, with the truth known, Andrew insisted on something simple, but honest. She made mistakes, Andrew said in a short speech, but she was more than her silence. She was my mother, and in the end, she tried to set things right. There was no applause, but several nodded. Clara's absence hung heavily in the air, as did Felix's. But those who mattered were there, and the house felt, if not whole, then healing. That evening, Poirot sat with Andrew in the conservatory, the sky blushing orange through the glass. "You will stay?" Andrew asked. Poirot smiled faintly. "None. The train calls." Then, before you go, Andrew stood and retrieved the velvet box. He opened it, revealing the sapphire bracelet, now restored though no longer wearable. The gem had been reset into a brooch, the broken links arranged around it like petals. "I had it changed," he said. "It felt wrong to keep it as it was." Poirot took it gently, studying it with approval. She would be pleased. Andrew handed him a second envelope. "What is this?" "My own will. I'm adding Clara, and a trust for the village school. She loved this place, even when it didn't love her back." Poirot smiled. "You are not just her son, Monsieur Talbot. You are her redemption." They stood. Poirot took his coat. "You have done more than inherit a house," he said. "You have inherited the burden of mercy. Do not forget that." "I won't," Andrew said. "And I won't forget you either." As Poirot's car pulled away from the hall, he looked back. Once, the house stood solemn, but no longer brooding. Its windows glinted in the last light, no longer like eyes but like lanterns. The mystery was solved. But more than that, truth had taken root. And in the garden, beneath the roses, a woman finally rested. Chapter 14. The Watcher in the West Wing. Montrose Hall was not yet rid of its shadows, though Poirot had departed the evening before, and the house had begun to feel, at last, like it might shrug off its weight. There were still things left undone, questions that flitted like moths round the candlelight of resolution. Andrew found himself waking early, a strange discomfort tugging at the edge of sleep. Not fear, not sorrow, a tension, a feeling of being observed. That morning, as he passed through the West Wing, a corridor he had once avoided, he paused. A light glowed under one of the doors. The wing had been closed for months. Cecilia had ordered it shut following an illness the previous year, claiming the damp aggravated her lungs. But the light was unmistakable. Andrew pushed the door open. Dust hung in the air. The curtains were half drawn, the fireplace cold. The room had clearly not been touched in some time, yet the lamp by the writing desk flickered dimly, and beside the lamp, A diary, not one of Cecilia's official leather-bound volumes, which Poirot had already reviewed. This one was smaller, older. The cover was faded rose velvet. The spine frame. Andrew picked it up and opened to the first page. To whomever finds this, know that I tried. I tried to speak, but the silence had grown too loud to escape. CMHI's breath caught. He sat down and turned the pages slowly. Entries filled the diary, beginning from a time long before the recent events. Notes written in a more vulnerable hand than the ones he'd seen before. No formal ledger entries, no record of village meetings. Just thoughts, hopes, doubts, wounds. I see him sometimes. In the garden. The way he tilts his head when he listens, he has my brother's chin, but his father's hands. I told Reverend Blakely he was safe, that I wouldn't disturb the balance. But I lied. I wanted.